because today I'm going to be talking about site reliability engineering, and we'll talk about how the key principles and practices of an SRE practice can be used to build high-performing software and teams. I'm also planning to deep dive on how learning and development programs really can contribute to a positive shift in organizational culture. So before I do a brief intro, I just wanted to say, if you want to check out the slides and follow along, the usual QR code, and if you would like to give feedback after the talk, feedback is a gift, of course, so please take it away. I'll give that 1 second. All right, so let me start by introducing myself, kind of building on what Fabio told you. So hello, my name is Jennifer Petoff. My nickname is Dr. J. That is because I have a PhD in synthetic chemistry, so I've started in a very different place from where I am today. I currently lead the global Google Cloud Platform and Technical Infrastructure Education team. So we're a training team that focuses on scalable learning programs for an organization spanning thousands of engineers. And SRE EDU and perpetuating the site reliability engineering culture at Google is a key part of my remit. I'm probably most well known outside of Google as one of the co-editors of the original SRE book that we published in 2016. And Fabio called it my book, but this was actually a book that involved 70 contributors representing over 500 years of Google production experience. So coolest project that I've ever worked on in my career, I'd say. So just to give a little bit of context around that. And then fun fact, I am also a part-time travel blogger at Sidewalk Safari. So you can imagine I was quite excited to have the opportunity to come here to Bologna and join you all today. All right, with introductions out of the way, let's dive into the topic at hand, which is building high-performance software and teams. So to be successful as a business, you need technology. That goes without saying. Pretty much every talk that we've heard this morning has been very deep on the tech side, on the technical side. But the reality is that great technology without great people and without great practices is bound to fail, or at the very least, you're making things harder on yourself. And I do think we do spend a lot of time thinking about technology, and sometimes the people, the processes, the practices can be an afterthought. So with this in mind, I'm going to focus on the people and practices side of things today. And why is that? Why is this so important? It's important because we have a problem. And in the software development lifecycle, we have an inherent problem, and that is a people problem. If you consider the traditional software development model, you've got developers on one side who are building shiny new features, and then they're throwing things over the proverbial wall to the operations team, and then they're moving on to the next new and shiny thing. Meanwhile, you've got operators who are really juggling everything that's being thrown at them while being responsible for scalability, reliability, maintenance of the new software, and everything else that's already sitting on their plate. So the incentives for developers and operators are just really not aligned. Developers want to go as fast as they can. Operators want to slow down to reduce risks. And this is not a system that's designed for harmony. It's brittle and it doesn't scale particularly well. So how does SRE fit into the product lifecycle? It's essentially a bridge between the business, development, and operations. It gives us a shared language. It gives us shared goals. And it actually helps take any negative emotion out of decision making, because you're basically agreeing in advance what good enough and reliable enough is in the context of a given service. So before we jump into the heart of the presentation, I thought I would do just a level set and give you a short summary about what SRE is from Google's perspective and how it fits into the software development lifecycle. So SRE originated at Google back in 2003. We just celebrated our 20th birthday of SRE back in October. It's a framework to operate and scale systems reliably without overwhelming the people who are operating those systems. Vice President Ben Traynor-Sloss, who's the founder of SRE at Google, is known for saying, so SRE is what happens when you ask a software engineer to design an operations function. There's really this emphasis on engineering solutions, this emphasis on running systems in productions, you're running them smartly using software engineering techniques. And while Google is a very big company, we believe that the foundational principles underlying SRE apply well to both small and large organizations. And the TLDR is that SRE can really be distilled down into 4 key principles. Site reliability engineering needs service level objectives that have consequences if you don't meet them. Site reliability engineers really need to have time to make tomorrow better than today through software and systems engineering-driven improvements. SRE teams need to have the ability to regulate their workload through automation or pushing back on developers when that ops load gets too high. And finally, and we're gonna talk quite a bit about this today, failure is an opportunity to improve. So SREs and the organization's leaders really remove the word blame from their vocabulary. Things are going to go wrong, and failure needs to be seen as an opportunity to improve. So now I want to talk for a minute about the annual State of DevOps Report. So this report is built annually on survey submissions from thousands of practitioners around the world. And each year it looks at the relationship between software delivery performance and organizational performance across dimensions like profitability, market share, and productivity. And the 4 dimensions that are shown here are really predictive of organizational performance. And these are deployment frequency, lead time for changes, change failure rate, and mean time to recover from incidents. Now you'll note that 2 of these dimensions really focus on speed, and 2 focus on stability and reliability. So that's great. Having these 4 key drivers is great, but there's more to it than that. So improving all the technology, processes, and capabilities. If you do all this, it won't help you succeed without a healthy organizational culture. And it turns out that measuring and evaluating culture is actually a pretty difficult task. And the DORA research that informs the State of DevOps report did use a number of measures to get a sense of an organization's culture. So they looked at Westrom's typology of organizational cultures, employee flexibility, and then knowledge sharing across the organization to help evaluate what a culture is like. In addition, they looked at user centrism of a team, the stability of the environment in which they work, and how the work is distributed across the team. And it turns out that culture, and especially a generative culture, is a key driver of employees' well-being and organizational performance. So according to the research, it leads to meaningful increases in team performance, organizational performance, software delivery, and operational performance. So you really get this lift. And it turns out that teams with generative cultures, and I'll explain a little bit more about what that means exactly in a couple of minutes, but teams with generative cultures have 30% higher organizational performance. So why am I even bothering to tell you all this? How does this actually connect to SRE? So a big part of SRE is thinking about what happens if something breaks. Actually, it's not if something breaks. We all know it's when something breaks. There's no such thing as 100% reliability. Murphy's Law tells us that no matter how hard we try to prevent it, things will break, things will go wrong. And when something breaks, how do people on the team actually respond to that? How does the organization respond to failure? When something breaks, is failure viewed like this? I'm extremely angry right now. People should lose their jobs if this was an error. I think the nuclear alert false alarm that's triggered panic throughout the US state of Hawaii back in January 2018 is a really interesting case study to explore. So for those who don't remember, human error, do that with air quotes, caused a statewide emergency alert to go out about an inbound nuclear missile attack. People were freaking out, etc. But the reaction here that you're seeing, it's clearly very blameful. People should lose their jobs. And you may be wondering, what's the harm in blame? Why shouldn't heads roll if there was a mistake made? The reality is that if there's an expectation that you'll be blamed if something goes wrong, you're incentivized to cover it up, to sweep it under the rug. So let me just talk a little bit, the case for blamelessness. Failure happens, there's no way around it. Murphy's Law tells us that this is so. And if you acknowledge that something has gone wrong or a mistake has been made, you and the team can start working to fix it. leading to faster, improved mean time to detect, mean time to resolve the situation. And also, if people feel like they can come forward when they make a mistake or notice a problem, you have the opportunity to proactively address a potential point of failure and ultimately deliver more robust systems to your users. If you keep hiding the problems, you'll end up with a brittle, failure-prone system. So simply stated, failure is an opportunity to improve, not to brandish pitchforks. And this concept of blamelessness is really foundational to an SRE culture. And it turns out that blamelessness is also tied to organizational performance. So in some organizations, failure leads to scapegoating. It's not my fault. Like, why are you pointing the finger at me? In some organizations, failure leads to justice. Justice must be served, heads must roll. And then finally, failure leads to inquiry. This is another approach to considering failure. And in this case, we take this failure as a chance to investigate the system so that we can learn more about it and improve the system going forward. And failure leads to inquiry, which is at its core a foundational SRE tenet. It's a key element of a generative culture. And as we saw earlier, this type of organizational culture, one that's high trust, one that emphasizes the flow of information, is predictive of software delivery performance and organizational performance in technology. So how do you figure out how your organization actually stacks up in these aspects? It turns out you can readily collect data very, very informally from your teams about how information and ideas flow. And it's good to think about this not only during incidents, but during regular times too. So you poll your team with this type of questionnaire, maybe quarterly. So asking questions like, on my team, information is actively sought. On my team, messengers are not punished when they deliver news of failure or other bad news. On my team, responsibilities are shared. On my team, cross-functional collaboration is encouraged and rewarded. On my team, failure causes inquiry. On my team, new ideas are welcomed. So now let's think a little bit about what actually drives organizational culture. So perhaps you're doing well as an organization, or perhaps you'd like to shift the culture based on what you found doing a quick assessment like on the previous slide. So what drives culture? Is it a state of mind, getting people to think a certain way, or is it behavior? So the State of DevOps Report research shows that changing the way people work is what changes culture. And this is echoed in the work of John Shook, who spoke of his experiences in transforming culture. So to quote, the way to change culture is not to first change how people think, but instead to start by changing how people behave, what they actually do. And I like to think about it as this. So confidence drives behavior, and behavior repeated over time is what drives the culture. Which begs the question, how do you generate the confidence to start this whole virtuous cycle? So my job, my day job, when I'm not speaking at conferences, is to deliver learning programs to the engineers at Google. And I assert that learning and well-crafted learning programs can be a driver of positive organizational culture and high-performing teams. How is this? So some people think about training and training programs as being all about cramming as much information into someone's head as humanly possible, setting up this proverbial fire hose of information. But the reality is, no matter how much you tell people, they're only going to retain a very small amount, especially in a lecture format. So training is really not about the fire hose. It's actually about believing in yourself. It's about building confidence. It's about fighting imposter syndrome. And this is especially true for people who are new to a team. And going beyond confidence, training is also about driving or perpetuating a desired organizational culture. So just like with these hot air balloons, training can give you a lift. So going back to the diagram that I shared, I like to think about learning as the confidence engine, which in turn shifts the culture into high gear. So let me share a quick case study. Oops, backwards, forwards, there we go. So I'm going to talk quickly about how we measure how effectively we move the needle on confidence with Google's SRE EDU orientation program. So in summary, we benchmark culture through confidence in a 4-step process. We define survey questions, we ground the rating scale, we measure results over time, and then we analyze and compare. Diving into this a little more deeply, we have defined a few reliability culture questions that are included in SRE EDU orientation surveys, as well as surveys for our general developer onboarding across Google Engineering. And these questions are, please rate your ability to do the following tasks. So to, number one, explain the benefits of a blameless postmortem culture. Two, to measure my service's alignment with business goals. So this gets at service level objectives and error budgets. And three, using monitoring and alerting to make rational decisions about my service. And it's important to use a grounded scale when you're doing this. So if you use a general 5-point scale without grounding, it introduces variability. Without grounding, one person's 3 could be another person's 5, and it's really difficult to compare. So we use this particular rating scale to benchmark the questions that I shared on the previous slide. So, how much do you agree with rate your confidence basically on the following tasks, your ability to do the following tasks. And the scale goes from no idea where to start, could do it with someone's help, could do it on my own, basically figure it out myself, could do it mostly from memory, could teach others mostly from memory. And you can see here, this ranges from I have no idea what I'm doing, I have no confidence, to I am supremely confident. As you can imagine, you're never more confident than when you can teach something to somebody else. And then to figure out how well a program is moving the needle on confidence, we need to look at that survey data measured over time. So for our programs, we ask the confidence questions 4 times in 6 months. Before orientation, after orientation, 1 month after orientation, and then 6 months. And then in addition to looking at trends for SRE EDU orientation over time, we also look at comparisons between SRE EDU, where the learning objectives are specifically about reliability principles, best practices, and we compare to general developer onboarding, which has a more general curriculum, and it doesn't explicitly address reliability in the same way. So now I'd like to show you the output of this exercise and how we demonstrate that SRE EDU orientation moves the needle on confidence. And again, don't forget, the assertion is learning drives confidence, confidence drives behavior, and behavior repeated over time is what drives the culture. So this slide addresses in aggregate the confidence of our learners in their ability to explain the benefits of a blameless postmortem culture at different points in their ramp up. Now the blue line represents those who took general developer onboarding, and the red line represents those who took SRE EDU orientation. Now you'll see up here NLS. I'm a big fan of TLAs, 3-letter acronyms. In this case, NLS is defined as a net learning score, which is a view of the broad level of confidence of our cohorts at different points in time. And we define NLS like a net promoter score. So we take the top 2 buckets of our surveys. I could do it mostly from memory. I could teach others mostly from memory. We subtract the bottom 2 buckets. I have no idea where to start. I could do it with someone's help, and divide by the total number of responses. And the scale hypothetically runs from -1 to +1, with +1 representing the maximum confidence. So as you can see, the confidence of SRE EDU orientation participants grows over time. And SRE EDU participants are more confident about this topic at each survey point than their counterparts who took the general developer onboarding. And this is important to show that when we specifically focus on reliability principles and best practices, we can drive confidence and, in the long run, culture. We see that this effect is even more pronounced when we assess confidence on measuring my service's alignment with business objectives. So once again, we see confidence growing over time, with a bump particularly pronounced between pre- and post-training surveys. And those who complete SRE EDU orientation are more confident on the subject of SLOs and error budgets than those who completed the general developer onboarding. Before orientation, confidence was essentially equivalent and low, and then it quickly diverged with SRE EDU attendees gaining more confidence more quickly. Again, totally expected, totally working as intended, since we're putting explicit focus on reliability, whereas the general developer onboarding is not. We see a similar trend in using monitoring and alerting to make rational decisions about our service. So those who complete SRE EDU orientation are more confident on the topic of monitoring than those who completed the general developer onboarding. Once again, before orientation, confidence equivalent and low, and then quickly diverging with SRE EDU attendees gaining more confidence more quickly. Now, the observant among you may have noticed the dips in the confidence graph between orientation and 1 month after orientation. So we hypothesize that this is a correction for overconfidence. So I thought I understood this, but apparently I have more to learn. There's really a lot of nuance in these concepts, and they take time to fully understand. But you do see that between 1 and 6 months, confidence increases again and surpasses the post-orientation levels for SRE EDU participants, while general developer onboarding participants rate their confidence a net negative even after 6 months. Okay, so now I hope I've piqued your interest by drawing this connection between learning and confidence and culture. Now I want to deep dive into some considerations if you plan to spin up your own training program. And while I'll talk about this in the context of an SRE or a DevOps practice, I think these general principles and considerations could be applied to any type of organizational transformation. All right, so in light of all this, how should you go about training your SREs? There's really no one-size-fits-all approach, but rather training methods that lie along a continuum of low to high effort. So on one extreme, you've got sink or swim, which means letting people just figure things out on their own with no guidance or support. And then at the other end, you have the systematic training program. So this is a program with well thought out learning objectives, content to support those objectives, with a curriculum that's offered consistently and on a scheduled basis. And then there's a few options in between. So a couple of tips right away. Avoid sink or swim if you value inclusivity. So sink or swim can really breed stress, frustration, even attrition, and it can also contribute to imposter syndrome. So, and for the other options, you'll want to consider the return on investment of the amount of effort that you're investing in the program. So some of the advantages of the higher touch or higher effort options are really organizational. So if you invest in training in these higher touch options, which culminate in a full-fledged training program, these can really demonstrate leadership's commitment to their development of employees. They can ensure that everyone speaks with one voice. If there's one thing that I've learned about SREs, they can be quite opinionated. So if you rely on the buddy system, the results you get could vary on who the mentor or the buddy is and what their opinions are, what their predilections are. And by investing in a program, it can help imbibe that desired culture, reinforce desired behaviors. All right, sip of water. So the first question that probably comes to your mind, this is what comes to everyone's mind first thing, what should I teach? What should we do? And what you include in your training really boils down to these dimensions: maturity, familiarity, and experience. So maturity is about the maturity of your organization in adopting key principles, practices, and culture. So are you early on in your DevOps or SRE journey, or are you old pros with a well-established practice? For familiarity, we're going to zoom in on the individual. So how familiar are your engineers with your organization and with your infrastructure? And then experience. So in particular, have individuals worked in an SRE organization at another company? Have they practiced DevOps elsewhere before joining your company? So you want to figure out where people are along that continuum. So let's start by considering the case of those who are just starting out on their SRE journey. So how can we ensure that we minimize the pain on the long and potentially bumpy road ahead? So this is the low organizational maturity use case. You're just getting started in adopting SRE principles and practices. So first off, start by addressing any skill gaps. You ask yourself some foundational questions about your team, and things like, do you have a defect tracking system? Do you have a project planning model? Do you have your version control situation under control? Are you doing design docs before you go off and implement? Do you have a shared repository of commonly used tools and libraries? And if the answer to any of these questions, or the majority of these questions, is no, start here and address those gaps with training. So now on to step 2. So consider who you have on your team and how to tailor the message to the people on the team. The reaction of individual team members to a proposed SRE transformation will depend on how familiar they are with your organization and current culture, crossed with their level of SRE experience. So for example, have they practiced SRE elsewhere? So now the people who've just joined your organization and who have a low level or no experience with SRE are probably just going to roll with it. The people you need to watch out for are those who've been in your organization for a while, but who don't have personal experience with SRE or DevOps. These folks could, in theory, be resistant to the proposed change, so you need to address, what's in it for me, why is it different this time, if this is just seen as the next in a long line of organizational transformations that will quickly fade. And for people who have existing SRE or DevOps experience, these are your catalysts. So empower these members of the team to tell their story. And again, tailor the format and content of your proposed training to address these unique needs. Now, what about organizations that already have well-established SRE teams or practices? So now it's all about building confidence and reinforcing that culture that you've built. And I'll talk quickly about building a training program for this use case. So this is the high organizational maturity use case. Now we need to, now that we've got a well-established culture and practice, we need to dig in and evaluate the mix of people on the team. And we're going to do this along the dimensions of organizational familiarity and experience once again. So newbies, you've got your newbies. These are people who are just joining the company and also less familiar with SRE. Internal transfers are expected to have high familiarity with your company, but low experience in the SRE space. Old-timers, these are the folks who've worked at the company for a while. They know the company, they know the culture. And then finally, industry veterans. So these are people who have a high level of experience with SRE or DevOps, but are new to your particular company. So now let's look at the learning needs for each of these audiences. So once you've assessed the mix of people in the organization, you want to figure out where to focus the training content. Newbies typically need the most attention. They need to learn your infrastructure and the culture. Internal transfers may know your systems, but are less familiar with SRE practices, so focus there. Old-timers are experienced on both dimensions, so you want to go for technical depth to unlock career growth. And then finally, industry veterans, they need to ramp up on your infrastructure and processes. They may need to unlearn some bad habits, so focus in on the specifics. Okay, so that's a bit about the what you might want to include in the training program. However, there's a whole other side we've yet to consider. I'd like to draw an analogy between the software development lifecycle and building and running a training program. In both cases, we need to consider the what and the how. So from a software development perspective, the what is your shiny product features, and the how is deploying to production in a reliable way to meet the needs of your users. In the training program content, once again, the what is your shiny training content, and the how is deploying a consistent and reliable program that meets the needs of your learners. So let's talk about the how, the all-important how, and often overlooked how of developing a training program. So this is really about operations, and there's two dimensions you should consider: size and growth rate. These operational dimensions inform how much effort you want to invest in training your organization. If your organization is small and growing slowly, focusing on one-on-one knowledge transfer through mentoring and shadowing is probably the way to go. If you're large and growing slowly, invest in ongoing education as a retention and career development tool. If you're small and growing fast, invest in onboarding. And if you're both large and growing rapidly, it makes sense to invest in a full lifecycle training program. So the Google SRE team falls into that large and rapidly growing category, and that's why we've invested in my team to develop this full lifecycle training program. So to summarize, invest the most under conditions of rapid growth. Small but rapidly growing organizations benefit the most from onboarding, but don't forget about your existing people. Invest in their ongoing education to help with their career development. So now that we've talked about the what and the how, I want to talk quickly about the where, as in where to begin. So in this case, I have two words, ASBAT, or one acronym, ASBAT. A student should be able to. So let's talk about ASBATs for a training program. Your first thought might be something like, my goal is to understand the foo service. The reality is that this is written in a very passive and hard to understand way, hard to observe way. Instead, you should focus on the behaviors that you're trying to drive. The goal is to observe and measure how training is applied. So for example, interpret a graph in the monitoring tool to identify the health of the foo service. So a student should be able to blah. So again, we want to observe and measure how the training is applied. And there's a simple model you can use to aid in the development of your training program. So instructional designers call this the ADDI model. So you analyze needs, design based on aspects, develop the training content, implement the program, evaluate the effectiveness, and then drive a really tight and iterative feedback loop. So let's get meta for a minute. This talk is about training site reliability engineers, and it turns out the foundational principles of SRE can be applied to the training program itself. So this is the service reliability hierarchy that we published in the original SRE book. And the hierarchy covers the elements that go into making a service reliable from the most foundational to the most advanced. And it turns out that the elements of the service reliability hierarchy can be adapted to the training context. We do monitoring in the form of attendance tracking and survey feedback. We address the issues that surface via monitoring. We occasionally write postmortems when things go wrong so we can learn from failure. We do a lot of testing of new content and programs, all the while scaling our operations by looking for opportunities to vanquish toil so we can make the most of our limited human resources. And it's only when we do all these things that our program can be fully actualized and we can realize that potential of the program itself. So I have a whole talk I give on the sort of meta aspects of this, but I'm just going to leave you with a little sample since I'm running out of time. Here's a page that we take from our SRE playbook. Is more effort always better? No, it is not. So just like SRE, we strive for a balance between competing concerns. We want to balance the effort that we invest versus the results that we get. And the SRE principle in practice here is you want to do just enough to meet the needs of your students. You want to keep them happy, but not so happy. And then you want to consider the trade-offs and avoid, like if you've got a really good program, stick with it, stay at that level, but then invest your effort elsewhere. Because if you keep investing in your polishing the diamond, you're losing out on other potential things you could be doing. So let me leave you with a couple of takeaways. So training is an investment. It's an investment in your organization and in your people. Evaluate the cost and benefits to make sure you're making the right amount of investment. Where to invest depends on the what and the how of your organizational circumstances, and walk the talk. So apply SRE or DevOps principles to the training program itself for a consistent and reliable experience. And in summary, confidence is what revs your culture engine. And ultimately, if we believe the State of DevOps Report research, it leads to basically elite organizational performance. So I'm going to leave you with just a quick link to learn more, including the full text of all 3 Google SRE books, as well as a number of shorter form publications if you're interested. I also have a few copies here if you want to go old school and would like a hard copy. And then if you're interested in reading more on the State of DevOps Report, door.dev/report. And I don't know, we are probably out of time for questions, but I'll be around afterwards if people would like to have a chat.
We can take one.
Oh, one question.
Francesca connects
yes.
MacBook or computer, I don't know.
Okay, yeah.
Raise your hand. 3, 2, 1. Oh, I didn't check online if we have questions, but in the meantime, I spoiled that. Well, of course, thanks for your talk. Big applause.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Cheers.
Okay, I didn't see question from online, but I think that she's around for a few hours. And fun fact, she loves doors, and she have a blog of doors picture, and it's Dr. J_.
Sidewalk Safari on
Sidewalk
Instagram.
Safaris on Instagram. So you can Instagram her and ask her for technical questions, but also
Yeah,
enjoy
the LinkedIn's probably a better place for the technical questions, but I will talk your ear off about doors.
Yeah,
so thank
I
you.
wanted to have a hook to find you online.
Yes.
But yeah,
Perfect.
she's around. Thank you again.
Thank you so much. Yay.